Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me out there? Good. Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight on this beautiful day and this holiday weekend. We so appreciate you joining us for our virtual book reading series. Tonight, we are blessed to have Rachel Davis. It's going to be our reader this evening, and she is a student at Sweet Briar. And I understand, Rachel, that you are studying both literature and music. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And what music do you like, or what instrument do you play?
I'm mainly a percussionist.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm gonna, without too much talking from me, everyone wants to hear from you, Rachel. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you. Feel free to give us a little introduction of yourself if you like, or just go right into your reading. Let us know a little bit about what you're reading. And then at the end, if anyone has questions or comments about the reading, we'll open it up for discussion. So in the meantime, it looks like everybody else is muted, so I'll go ahead and mute myself too. But thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. If everybody doesn't mind, I'm probably gonna jump right into this. This is last week grasp of the evening's dying light. One second, please. Pardon me. Joan and Benjamin Sullivan had been married for 3 unremarkable years when their lives were taken as they slept one night, nearly 60 years before Cameron moved into their former house on Ash Street. Cameron was a single woman barely able to afford her mortgage when she started living, unbeknownst to her, with the dead. Benjamin never paid attention to those who lived in the house with them, but Joan, who had a general interest in human life, was nearly overwhelmed by her fascination with the latest homeowner. Cameron was 25, 2 years older than Joan had been at the time of her death. Cameron wasn't aware she didn't truly live alone. Though Joan couldn't control the cold spots she left around the house or how her steps still sounded on the staircase, her idiosyncrasies were easily explained away by faulty heating systems or settling houses. Not knowing the source of them, Cameron chalked these faults up to the house being old. Still, and even with how silly she knew they were, she had her suspicions that something or someone might linger in the home. Sometimes, when the quiet really settled in the space, she'd try to get their attention. "Knock something over if you can hear me," she'd say, sitting on the purple love seat she'd bought secondhand, typically while scrolling through cyberspace or flipping through some novel a website had recommended. Benjamin, who preferred to stay away from the not yet deceased, never heard these invitations. Joan, who was typically seated on the opposite end of the couch, never responded. Cameron was confusing to Joan. Her hair was cut short, almost like a man's. She spent all day out of the house and didn't arrive until the sun started its descent from the sky. She hardly ever cooked and saved every bag from takeout or delivery in one of the kitchen drawers, just in case she needed them. She never hosted. She never wore makeup. Joan thought back on her own life. She wasn't sure if Cameron was some sort of anomaly or if life had shifted so rapidly since Joan had a part in it. Judging by the types of people she saw in that little thing Cameron called a phone, she realized that in 60 years, life had left her behind. Sometimes during the day, when Joan grew restless, she'd head back upstairs to what used to be her bedroom, now an unused office, back to her Benjamin. He smiled whenever he saw her, and told her about all the things he saw from the window, how the gray squirrel population, once overtaken by a different species, had recovered its numbers in recent years, or how the ash streets the street had taken its name from were practically all gone. Had life gone differently, he might have been a biologist. Joan listened as patiently as she could, but never said anything herself. What was there to say? She wasn't sure she would have 60 years of words for him even if they had lived. Maybe it was for the best they died when they did. Even so, she almost looked forward to seeing him every day. She found the same comfort in him that she assumed people found in keeping fish. The filling of time, the soft noise drowning out the silence, the relief of knowing one isn't alone in their solitude. All while Benjamin talked, Joan was straining her ears to listen to the front door open and shut. She knew as soon as she did, she would head downstairs and sit on that purple love seat, inches away from where Cameron was. Sunlight would stream in through the window above them, going over their heads and projecting onto the floor. They sat like that for hours. Jo noticed lots of little things about Cameron. She hardly laughed when she found something funny, but the lines around her eyes would crinkle. If she were to cross her legs, she would only put her ankle on her knee. Sometimes Cameron would set her hand between the two of them, unaware that there was only a bit of space between her and somebody else. When this happened, Joan felt an intense urge to reach over and grab it. She didn't know what she could gain from it, incorporeal she was, but she did know that she had hardly touched anyone since she had been alive, and that Cameron's hand, broad but not calloused, seemed like something it might be nice to hold. One evening, it might have been summer, Cameron came home, sat on the couch and started to cry. At first she was silent, occasionally stopping to wipe away a tear, but her breathing became heavier and her nose started to run, and eventually she began muttering to herself about how she hated this job and this town, and how Alex had run off and left her alone in the house, and all the muttering turned to groaning, then sobbing, then burying her face in a pillow and smacking the arm of the couch, and then when Joan, not knowing what else to do, put a hand on her shoulder, Cameron immediately froze, suddenly, tensely silent. "Hello?" she murmured into the pillow. "Hi," Joan whispered. Cameron sat up and looked around. For a moment she looked straight into Joan's eyes. The last rays of sun struck her in the face, lighting everything in gold. "Such a fucking idiot talking to myself like this," she said, rubbing her face. "Nobody wants to be around, so I make them up. That's not pathetic." Joan didn't know why she was upset by this. She walked upstairs, and not looking at Benjamin, climbed into the bed that used to be hers, wishing she could die all over again. Cameron avoided the living room that week. Occasionally she'd go down there and grab something, and more than once she stood in the doorway, holding a book and nearly going in, before deciding to go up and read in her bedroom. This meant the upstairs was only occupied by Cameron and Benjamin, and they spent long hours ignoring each other. Jo didn't see either one of them that week. She felt she wasn't welcome to join them. To occupy her time while all of this went on, she walked through the lower portion of the house, paying attention to all the home's renovations over the years. The kitchen floor was on its third iteration since Joan had been alive, currently sporting a hexagon tile, as opposed to the laminate square she had been so excited for. The living room was currently painted a light gray, a disappointingly safe choice. Cameron had 4 bookshelves, sporting titles like Good Omens and Bad Feminist. The books were punctuated with little trinkets, a few potted plants, a decorative spoon boasting that Virginia is for lovers. In the Florida room, tucked away behind its side table, was a crate full of actual records. Joan hadn't seen a real record in years, maybe decades. And it seemed like the ways people put their music just ended up getting smaller and smaller, to the point where sometimes Cameron played songs off her phone without Joan even seeing the disc, or box, as had been the custom for years, that contained the track itself. 1 second, please. Joan remembered the design from the men who had lived in the house about 20 years after she had. They filled their space with bright orange walls, books like Frank O'Hara's lunch poems, and they had vinyl too, from the likes of Donna Summer and Joni Mitchell. They had strung beads on fishing line and put them in all the doorways. The curtain rattled whenever Joan walked through, but the then owners didn't seem troubled by her presence. Joan thought of them often. They didn't tell people they were family. They didn't want to lie, but they couldn't help what people assumed about their arrangement. Jo noticed the way they were guarded around so many of those who came to the house, their postures stiff and separate, and the ways in which they loosened around each other. Sometimes one would stretch out on the couch, putting his head in the lap of his housemate, reading something aloud as the other ran his fingers through his hair. At first, she was puzzled as she watched them, unsure of what to make of their relationship as they cooked together or fought over whether to let parents visit. Of course she knew of men who lived this way in the company of each other, but she had never seen it like this, so comfortable, domestic, open. She didn't know what to make of it. The last time she remembered really talking to Benjamin was when those two had lived there. They had started dancing in the Florida room, and she felt almost like a voyeur watching it happen, so she went upstairs. Benjamin, as always, was in the bedroom, but instead of staring out of his window, he was watching a sleeping tabby cat enthralled. "Isn't she gorgeous, Joan?" he said, smiling. He always smiled, but this was the first time she was certain it was genuine. "Her name is Twiggy," she answered. "Twiggy," he repeated. "Because she's brown like a stick, I assume." Joan didn't correct him. Sometimes I wish we had gotten a cat, or maybe a dog when we were still alive. Something that could bring a sense of cheer to the place. But maybe it's mean to wish for that, considering. He paused. It's probably for the best we didn't have a baby. Maybe, Joan said, feeling guilty that she agreed. Benjamin, what do you think of the people who live here now? Well, I can't say I think of the people much. I think they made some garish choices in decor, but they stay out of my way and I stay out of theirs. But does it bother you that they're both men? He thought for a moment. Joan, does it bother you that deer sometimes eat meat? She blinked. Can they? He nodded. Does it bother you? I suppose not. Exactly. Joan said. She turned away from Benjamin, not wanting him to see her face. A few days later, Joan and the couple were all downstairs. Joan was watching them look all over the living room for Twiggy. One of them stopped his search for a moment to touch his partner's shoulder, assuring him that she couldn't have gotten far, and she was just hiding somewhere, like always. And it dawned on Joan how lonely she had been. Not just in death, but in her life, too. She thought of Benjamin, who was upstairs almost certainly with the missing cat, and whether or not they could have ever have been in this position, laughing together while one struggled to lift the couch and the other sprawled on the ground to try and see under it, both lit up golden in the late afternoon sun. There was a pain in what used to be her chest from the knowledge that this lack of intimacy was her fault. Her heart broke completely when the couple moved out. The next time Cameron came home, she went straight to the living room. Joan was surprised but grateful to see her after the week of avoidance. Instead of the couch, she sat on the floor, crossing her legs. In front of her was her phone. I'm going to press record, Cameron said. If you're here, whatever you are, it's going to pick up your voice, and I'm going to prove that I am not insane. Joan stared at the red circle on the little box and figured it a hopeless effort. After all this time, what could a box change? But then she looked at Cameron. Her eyebrows were arched, and she was, whether or not she realized, holding her breath, full of expectation, apprehension, and excitement. The expression was familiar. She had seen it on Benjamin's face as she had walked towards him on their wedding day. Hello, Joan said, tentative. Over the speakers again came Joan's hello. Cameron exhaled all at once, started laughing, and rubbed her eyes. Oh, God, she said. Thank God I'm not insane. God, that's such a relief. I thought I was making all of this up, but no, here you are. She took and released a deep breath. Can you tell me your name? The recording should be able to pick it up if you want to communicate. All the tension had left her shoulders. No one had ever been as relieved about a haunted house. My name is Joan Sullivan, she said. I lived in this house until 1956, and I've been here ever since. She paused, not sure what else to say. I've been waiting to talk to you for a long time. Joan stayed still as a grave, unsure of what she was waiting for. Finally, Cameron pressed the red button on her phone again, and Joan heard the whole interaction play back. For the first time in decades, she heard her own voice. She had almost forgotten what she sounded like. She couldn't tell if the recording was a bit off or if her timbre had somehow been affected by the years of disuse. She hated to think that Cameron's first impression was somehow wrong. Hello, Joan, Cameron said once the recording had finished. I've been waiting to meet you too. It was a complicated means of talking, but Cameron kept making and listening to recordings Joan happened to be on. Whenever Cameron would speak, she would start the recording again and wait for 1 minute, unsure of how long Joan would talk. Cameron would listen to the entire recording, fearing Joan would have something to say after a long pause. They spent hours this way some nights, having conversations that might have taken half the time otherwise. Neither one of them minded, grateful for the company. How did you die? Cameron asked one evening, a few weeks into these conversations. There was a gas leak, Joan responded. 57 seconds left on the recording. Oh, Cameron paused. How did it feel? I don't remember, Joan admitted. I had been asleep. She didn't explain the feeling of waking up feeling at odds with her body, then sitting up and rising out of it. As disappointed as she was to learn that heaven wasn't real, it was a relief to know that her fear of hell was unfounded. Maybe that was wrong, though. Maybe she was in hell, or maybe hell would be preferable to this. It would at least be a change of scenery. 50 seconds on the recording. Okay, Cameron said. Had it been a good sleep before that? There was about 5 seconds of dead air before Joan spoke. I guess it had been. Joan rarely wanted to be touched, and Benjamin respected that. Usually they had slept facing opposite one another, with Joan close to the edge of the mattress in order to maintain a sense of space. The night of the gas leak, though, she was stuck lying awake. Her nightgown was starting to itch, and the wall she was staring at seemed like it was mocking her. After what felt like hours, she rolled onto her other side. Benjamin's hair curled a bit when it started to get long, and it seemed like he was in need of a trip to the barber soon. Joan brushed her hand up his scalp, then placed that hand on his arm. Benjamin reached up and grabbed her hand with his own, wrapping her arm around him, holding her hand in his. Joan fell asleep quickly after and didn't wake up the next morning. 58 seconds. I'm glad you are well rested, Cameron said. The next time they talked like this, it was Joan's turn to ask questions. Why did you move into this house? 49 seconds on the recording. Well, my fiancé and I were looking to relocate. Well, ex-fiancé, I guess. Alex came through this town on a road trip a few years back and loved it. What drew him to it? 58 seconds. Her, Cameron responded. Joan's heart would have skipped if she had one. I think it was the scenery more than anything. She said she felt welcomed by the fields, whatever that means. I like to call her a free spirit. Then I got a job out here, and she would have thrown a fit if I hadn't taken it. Joan took a few minutes before responding. If she loved it so much, why are you alone? Cameron sighed, then chuckled. Like I said, free spirit. She could never settle in one place. Honestly, I wasn't all that surprised when she ran off. I should have seen it coming. Cameron was frowning now, her eyes blank. She didn't press the record button for a long time after that. Joan noticed she was messing with the hem of her shirt, almost nervous. It was still bright out that day, a few stray beams of sunlight cascading over Joan and Cameron on the couch. Joan couldn't believe how beautiful the scene was. She hadn't thought of anything as beautiful in a long time. I'm sorry, Cameron said, bringing her feet onto the couch and turning away from Joan. But I'm not turning the voice recorder back on tonight. Goodbye, then, Joan said, knowing she couldn't hear her. Cameron's hand had fallen between them again. Can I ask you something weird, Joan? Cameron asked a couple weeks later, now fully comfortable with the arrangement. Of course, Cameron, Joan responded. 53 seconds. When you were alive, did you know any, friends of Dorothy, you would probably have said, or Sappho? Do you know what I mean? Joan paused. Yes, I'm sure I do. Why do you want to know? Hey, what am I supposed to think if you get so bothered just by me asking? Cameron said with a laugh. Come on, I want to know about all the scandal that shocked this little town back in the day. We just didn't talk about it like you all can now, Joan said, tense. Cameron didn't let the full silence play. Jesus, Joan, there's no need to get mad about it. If it's so touchy, we can drop it. Nobody said anything for a few moments. I'm sorry, Cameron said. I didn't mean to prod. Here, I'll turn the recording on and you can talk about old movies or something. Joan took a breath. It took her another 5 seconds to speak. My best friend, Helen. She never got married, at least not while I was alive for it. She found work as a secretary and supported herself, and we all knew it was odd, but that was just Helen. And she found people like Sappho, like you said, and she seemed happy with herself, or at least as much as she could be. She could feel herself rambling. She didn't want to be alone. Who would want that? But she knew it wasn't safe, except, well, behind closed doors, she would, well. Joan couldn't bring herself to say the rest. God, how long since she had thought of Helen. Helen with brown eyes that lit up and became gold when the light hit them in bird's nest hair. More than anything, Joan remembered wrapping her arms around Helen's shoulders while Helen's hands were on her back, and how chapped her lips were. Joan wondered what had happened at the funeral. She was sure her body had been laid alongside Benjamin's. What had Helen thought of that? Had she even been there? What did she feel, seeing the body of the woman who, just the day before, had finally admitted she loved her? Joan felt dizzy. I have to go, she said, and she stood, feeling guilty cutting the conversation short. Wait! Cameron exclaimed. Joan stood still. Holy shit, Cameron said softly. Were you a brunette when you were alive? Joan nodded, feeling a little silly doing so. And right there, you nodded, said Cameron, who rose to join Joan. In the sunbeam, I can see you. Can you move some to see what the limitations are? Joan stepped more fully into the sunlight and did a twirl. God, this is so exciting. You've got on like a pink blouse and a brown skirt, right? Oh, man, do you even know if you have a physical form? Your hands are so small. Everything Cameron said was right. She really could see her. Cameron stepped into the light with her, the excitement of this development obvious on her face. Joan smiled back at her, pleased at being seen. Do you mind if I touch you? Cameron said. Joan nodded. Cameron put a hand on her shoulder. Do you feel that? Joan nodded. In that moment, all of the dizziness went away. She could have sworn she was almost feeling a thump, thump of a heart in her chest. She knew exactly why it seemed as loud as it did. She raised her right hand and cupped Cameron's cheek, her eyebrows raised slightly, almost imperceptible, in expectation. The sun had started to sink, and their kiss was bathed in the golden light of early evening. Pardon me 1 second. Joan stayed in the living room that night. Somehow, going to Cameron's bedroom would have been too intimate, and going to Benjamin would have been a betrayal. Oh, Benjamin. In all the excitement, she had almost forgotten all about him. She wondered if he'd mind. She tried to imagine how he would react if she told him. All I could think about was the way he looked whenever she went up to him. He'd always turn away from the window and smile, softly, the same way he'd smile at her when she made a favorite dish of his when they had been living. He had learned to go without food for decades now. Maybe he could do the same with her. In the next few days, Cameron asked Joan in the mornings if there was anything she'd really like to watch or listen to while she was at work. She left movies she'd never heard of on autoplay and let the AM station she was sure they used at the nursing home play the whole afternoon and didn't worry about the electricity bill. When she got home, they'd sit on the love seat together and Cameron would listen, now without having to outsource her hearing, while Joan went on and on about how much she admired Betty Grable and didn't understand why a band would name themselves after bugs, but she understood why it seemed like people liked them so much. Cameron, then, would talk about her time at work and the sort of music she liked, sometimes playing it off her phone while she and Joan were in the kitchen, Joan instructing Cameron on how to make the sorts of dishes she had already made in life. Joan liked hearing about new things. Cameron liked the way their hands fit together. It seemed that the more they talked, the more they sat together, the more they danced to Cameron's records and cooked Joan's food, the more material Joan became. She went from being visible in just the sunlight to being seen when she moved, like a moth flitting around just out of sight, to eventually being visible to Cameron no matter what. Her sturdy legs, her dainty waist, even the soft, barely perceptible hair that covered her forearms. When they would touch, there was almost no give. It was like she had been rebuilt, flesh and bone. Still, they knew this was only true to Cameron. When Jo would try to flip a record or grab a book, her hand would just pass through it. There was no forgetting their circumstances. Sometimes they watched movies together. It turned out they both loved Roman Holiday, which Joan had seen in theaters right after getting married. During that first viewing, she and Benjamin had shared a bag of popcorn, and Helen had whispered jokes into her ear the entire show. Cameron had taken up the latter practice, disappointed she couldn't also take up the former. Joan was sitting on Cameron's lap, their legs intertwined on the other side of the couch. Hey, Cameron said. Yeah? Joan responded. I think I love you. On screen, Audrey Hepburn was trying to drive Gregory Peck's scooter. Joan tried to remember the crack Helen had made then, but could only remember how hard Benjamin had laughed. I love you too, Joan said, and I have something I need to tell you. Cameron knocked on the door of her office before entering. Joan hadn't wanted him to be startled. She walked in before Cameron did. Hi, Joan, Benjamin said, smiling like he always did. Cameron stepped in before Joan had a chance to reply. Benjamin blinked. Huh, he said. I've barely seen her in here since she moved in. Joan turned to Cameron. Can you hear him? Benjamin's brow furrowed. Can she hear you? Joan nodded while Cameron shook her head. Joan was wringing her hands. She looked between the two of them before finally settling on Cameron. I need to tell you that I lived here with my husband. Cameron blinked. And he's still here, Joan continued. Right in that chair, actually. Cameron didn't respond immediately. Okay, she finally said. Do you talk to him much? No. Does he go around the house messing with things like you do? Not really. Do you love him? I don't know. Benjamin's confused expression melted into something sadder. Joan, what's going on? He asked. Cameron, can you give us the room? Joan asked. Cameron, still puzzled, left the ghost to talk. Joan told Benjamin everything. Not just everything about her and Cameron and how she had come to know and love her, but about how it was the first time since they had died that she didn't feel alone. She told him how much the two men from way back then had meant from her and how his ambivalence had hurt her. He told her how He told how lonely she had felt even when they were married, and how he had ignored her for work and didn't care about, and then ignored her for a world he didn't seem to give a damn about now. She told him about Helen. Benjamin, for once, didn't have anything to say. He listened patiently to all of it, glad that she was finally talking to him. I think I might be happy with her, Joan said. I think if I wasn't worried about hurting you, I would just be glad to be with another person for once, and I think I'd be glad she feels the same about me. Benjamin was sitting up straight. His feet were flat on the floor. His hands were on his knees, gripping them as tightly as he could. Joan, he asked softly, do you think you ever loved me? She sighed. I don't know. I can't remember that far. Did you ever really love me? You were the most beautiful girl I had ever met. And what were you going to do if I had ever gotten old and ugly? Joan. No, answer me. What would you have done? Benjamin wasn't looking at her. He was looking out the window. There was a raccoon outside, just a bit early. The sun was barely peeking over the other houses in the neighborhood. Plenty of people build a love as they get older. I'm sure we would have. But we haven't, she said. Joan, Benjamin said, don't you think I understand what it's like to be alone? I was in our marriage, too. Joan, having emptied herself of 60 years' worth of resentment, was suddenly filled with the same volume of guilt. I'm happy you're happy, and I'm glad you found someone to spend your time with. But where does that leave me? I'll end up more alone than ever. Benjamin and Joan stared at each other. Neither was sure the last time they had looked each other full in the face. Joan reached out to Benjamin and took one of his hands in her own. She only hoped she could be a comfort to him like he had been to her. I'm sorry I couldn't make you feel less alone than you were. He looked away from her. I'm sorry my loneliness became your burden. Looking down at Benjamin's hand, Joan became aware for the first time that his wedding band wasn't on his finger. She looked at her own left hand and found the same to be true for her. She wasn't sure if there had been some sort of gradual wearing away of the jewelry, or if they had been gone when they spoke. Both. Or if they had been gone when they first woke up as spirits. Maybe death had parted them, like they had vowed. The sun was no longer visible. The sky was turning purple, with smatterings of black creeping in. Inside, in the warm glow of the office's lights, everything was turning gold. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And if anyone has any questions or comments about the reading, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Rachel? Oh, it's on. Hi. That was amazing. That was really incredible. Really well read. And what a beautiful story. What a beautiful story. Really, really awesome. Thank you for reading.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi.
Hi. Can you talk about how you came to write that story, for example?
I wrote this for JGV and Carrie's love story class. Last November. I think in writing it, I was thinking a lot about my grandparents. And I was thinking a lot about how they had really gotten married out of a sort of convenience to each other. And I was doing a lot then with like genealogy and looking into the family history. And I was thinking about like living in a small town and all of the confusing stuff that comes with that, especially if you are growing up gay in a small town. And there was one day that JGB said, hey, I need everybody to come up with love triangles and interesting love triangles. And I said, what if there was like a ghost, two ghosts, and also a living person? And it's sort of not just a having to be torn between two people, but between like old, what you're used to, what you're comfortable with, and something new, something that's changing without you. And JGB called, he didn't say that was stupid, but he certainly implied it. And I said, well, now I have to use it for something. So I guess spite and family history.
I'm going to try not to take offense at that. I want to take credit rather than offense, Rachel. But what a remarkable story. It was remarkable when you first wrote it for the class, and it was remarkable to hear you read it tonight. That was really amazing.
Thank you so much.
Lovely, lovely job. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions out there? I don't want to cut us off too soon. But while you think,
I just might say that I think both Rachel and John Gregory Brown should take credit for that. That, you know, often some of our greatest things we accomplish are pushback. Do you know what I mean? You have to always remember that it's not always encouragement, but it's often pushback too. And you go, well, you know what? I think I'm right. I'm going to try this. Sometimes it will work and sometimes it wasn't. So congratulations, Rachel, that you have discovered that already. Good job.
Thank you so much.
Very good. Yes, very good. So next week we have Sienna Annabelle with us as another student from Sweet Briar. She'll be reading for us. So I hope you can all join us then. Please let your friends know about this series. And I'll also mention, I just want to give a quick mention to Bane's Books and Coffee. I like to mention it on this series because I know you are literature lovers. So if you get a chance to stop by the coffee shop and peruse the bookshelves, you might find something that you like to read. And also, of course, that's in our building. So you can ask for a tour of Second Stage and ask about what's going on around there. So we have this series going on. We have a virtual art class that's going on for kids right now. And very soon, Fridays in May, we will be having a movies on the lawn at Second Stage. So we're very excited about that. So if you could just join us next week, that would be just wonderful. Yes. Anyone, any other questions?
Are you planning anything on campus? You know, because Sweet Briar has so much space and you obviously have a long connection with the Sweet Briar campus from the past. Are there any events planned in the future there on campus?
For presented by Second Stage?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge right now, but certainly it's a good connection to further explore. So, you know, you never know. Maybe we will. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So please visit our website, secondstageamherst.org. And if you have any questions, you can always email us or give us a call. We'll be glad to help you out. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks,
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.